Right, number one, my personal message. You are all the people we need to thank at this. You have done more, I guess, than anybody else, probably in the years I've been working in the technology field, than anybody else to drive e-learning, as we now call it. We didn't call it e-learning in the early days, but I think what you're doing with handheld devices in its widest possible sphere. So you need a great big thank you. I also want to thank Graham and the team for putting this entire conference together, because I know that they do it on a shoestring, and what they achieve is fantastic. But I really do feel that you should have the credit for what goes on in the sector. So that's my thing. But what I also need to say is how many people are actually twittering at the moment and tweeting and, oh God. Now, can I say I used to be known as the person that used to do wowie presentations. I've stopped doing that because my team are much better and all of you are much better at it. So please forgive me for that. But how many people missed the fact that this happened while you're in coffee? Are you aware there's been an announcement? There's going to be another 118 projects, all about education, all about portables, laptops, whatever. How many people have put a bid in? How many people are frantically now Googling it? Okay? Isn't that a scary thing that in the past I could stand as a lecturer or a teacher, have this conversation with you, and you wouldn't be able to check what I'm saying? Yeah, but now you can. But are you not aware of that? Because the key thing for me is that bullet point that says areas to particularly focus on, special needs. Okay, which is partly the focus that I'd like to bring to you. You're not aware? How many people have heard about this? Is Jill here or anybody from MoleNet? Where's all the MoleNet mentors? Heard at the back, whoever they are? Oh, there they are. James, heard of this one? No. Good. I've got one up on James Clay. Woo! Sorry. Okay. Next. So what are we talking about then? Which years are we talking about? This is where your Google generation comes in. You'll immediately know which years we're talking about, because you'll be able to find the answer while I'm speaking. Again, think of that classroom teacher being able to handle the classroom when you've got things that you put on slides and they can get the answer before you can actually say it. How does that make you feel? How does it also make you feel if some of those kids with that handset in front of them has perhaps got Asperger's or something else that you're not quite sure of, but you know they're incessantly doing it? So who can find out the quickest which years are we talking about? Well, I was expecting some interaction, for goodness sake. If I said that there's some prizes, would that help? Oh, yeah, now we've got it. Right, go on then. At the back. Say again. Oh, did you just look that up, Rob? Which one, though? Which one? Which year? The year of astronomy. Can I just get upset now? The person that runs the Janet network, as far as I'm concerned, has just won a first prize. There you go. You can have that later, Rob Probacki. He's right. 2009 is the year of astronomy and the international year, which is very scary, of natural fibres. I'm not quite sure what that means, so somebody please tell me. But the other year, when was the other year? 1837. No, not as far as goes that. No. There is a reason, because we're talking about a project that I've just given you the details of, the 118 projects and the 30 in depth and the, all that kind of stuff I talked about. That's already happened, and those are the educational outcomes. So we're talking about a project with all that money and all that have found those things out. So when was it? Now, for all you technology buffs, I shall give you a really clear clue now. You should be able to work it out. Rob very kindly has told you that one of the answers is 2009. So what was the other year? Now, if you're as old as I am, you can look at the technology and work out what it is. Does anybody remember owning a Xeon 5? Or even a 3C? We won't go into Sinclair's things. What about that bottom one, the Amstrad? Who had an Amstrad note-taker? Oh, you see, there's only 3 of us in the room. I've still got one. The point is, what I'm trying to get at, believe it or not, that project that I outlined on my second slide was 15 years ago. So where's Neil from Vector? Thank you, Neil. You'll remember it. Portables in Action. We weren't even Vector then. This is when I was in a previous life. The Portables in Action project was announced in 1993 by the then Education Minister. Everybody remembers his name, of course. Eric Forth. However, it was reported in 94. That's 15 years ago. We spent £2.3 million on Portables in Action. Anybody from an LEA or a school was involved? Is there anybody left in the room that had anything to do with it? Got one. Oh, well, there we go. Gentleman in the middle, you'll have to have second prize. Not that you're in, you know, I'm not saying they're hierarchical, but we've got a second prize in the middle there. Okay. So, question is, are the things the same or different? Or is it just like Neil says, has it just got harder? Focusing on inclusion. Has the technology made it harder or easier? Could argue both sides. Teaching skills and confidence, a really hard one to tackle. Difficult at any time with any technologies, but even more so if you're looking around the inclusion agenda. What are you doing about assessment and equivalence? Touch on that later on, but how do you actually assess the different kinds of outputs that you can now do with this kind of technology? How do you actually look at assessments if you're looking at a forum, or you're looking at gaming, or you're looking at podcasts, or you're looking at video, or you're looking at essays? How do you actually get any sort of equivalence? What are we doing about that? What about reasonable adjustment for those people that need to have additional time or additional assistance or some sort of enabling technologies? How are you fitting that in your structures? Keys, obviously, again, management ethos of the organisation. I'm not sure whether that list there could be exactly the same from the 94 projects as it could now. It probably could, we'd just change the words slightly. But what I wanted to focus on very briefly, because it's another strand of the conference and there's lots of people around, is I just want to say congratulations to MoleNet. If you think of the amount of money that was spent in 1994, it was a one-year project in effect. And it did a fantastic job. And for those of you that have never seen the report, I could even wave it at you. And I'm sure you could put it on a camera somewhere, and there's lots of those around. But interestingly, I can't find the actual report on the web. There's allusions to it, but of course in those days we wouldn't have even had it to actually think about distributing it in that way. But because MoleNet has done the things it's done, there's many, many outcomes from MoleNet, but I've just picked those three out. And look at that top one. Making learning more accessible, more convenient, more inclusive, and most importantly, sensitive to learners' needs. Now, I'm guessing you do that all the time because you're here, you're at Handheld, you're passionate about that kind of area. But how do we take some of that information across into other areas of work? The non-traditional learners, whether they be NEETs, whether they be people with not English as their first language, whether they're asylum seekers, offenders, whatever they are, there's a place that we can now point to with MoleNet for things that are proving positive outcomes, a phenomenal resource. And look at the things that it's done around showing people about differentiated learning. It's also done a huge amount for me where I stand, just the tech and the DIS. For those that don't know, the technology is easy. The DIS used to be disability, but we try to hide that because you try heading a service when you're talking to staff with the two things they're frightened of the most, technology and disability. They run in the opposite direction for both of them. But MoleNet's done a fantastic job at dispelling some myths. You can see, I'm sure you're all familiar with the idea of QR codes, the thing at the top. There was a big issue. Should the actual program be opened up to learners with either difficulties or learning difficulties, disabilities, etc.? And quite rightly, yes, it was. And they've done some phenomenal work. Many, many people, in fact, National Star College have been award winners at various things, but have shown that by using QR codes just around the town where they live, they've helped independent living because it's enabled students to travel around the town without carers with them or mentors to show personalised development, if you like, of learning how to get around the town. The other thing, thinking about it from our perspective, is just being able to disseminate that good practice has resulted in many, many more people asking questions about what about mobile learning with my students? Is it possible? Can you do it? And of course, we've said absolutely, have a look at MoleNet, have a look at the case studies. A publication went out jointly with us around that whole area called Go Mobile, and another set of resources around a DVD and an online resource about how to help staff look at mobile learning inclusively. But what's changed? 15 years have gone by. I loved the previous speaker when we were looking at Africa and the one computer for every child. I had the luxury of going to Kazakhstan about last year, and I live in East Riding of Yorkshire. You could say fourth largest country in the world, largest county in England. What's the difference? Quite a lot. I could get 3G in Kazakhstan virtually every day. I can't get it where I live. I've only just got broadband, and I'm in one of those categories where, you know, it's that issue about what the speed is and all those kind of things. So Skyping at home is an interesting conversation. However, we didn't have the glue. And I think the glue is what you're providing. The kit is one thing, the connectivity is another, but the people and the massive change in the number of people that have got their hands on this stuff is absolutely vital. And taking that as a mantra, you now know that those kind of things, and forgive me for just pushing this together in haste, but just some of those things that are around. And what you class as mobile or handheld learning, other people just class now as gadgets in their home. I have to say that when you look, as now a grandmother of a little boy, and I have to apologise, he's got pink things. I mean, I do really think there's a gender issue there, which I perhaps need to speak to the other lady about. But I do think, you know, if you haven't looked at the way that toys have changed, if you haven't got to that luxury yet of seeing what those are like, the pen there to help 3-year-olds learn to read, it's exactly the same technology that we were giving out as assistive technology for dyslexics a couple of years ago. Vast amounts of difference. It's in Toys R Us at $16.99. Yeah. So the technology is in people's homes and hands, and they know what to do with it. How do we know how to tap that resource with the people that are in our organisations who need to then help people who have difficulties with whatever it may be? And that's the inclusion agenda that's the real key one for me. There's another interesting slide. All of those technologies are actually traditional, what we might call assistive technologies. But you can't tell the difference from, not the children's slide, but the slide previous to that. So we've got there a mobile phone with a braille interface. We've got an iPhone with voice output communication aids actually embedded into it. We've got the braille phone there, we've got the Android, we've got the easy to use. All of those things are designed by mainstream manufacturers to do things that will make a difference to people's lives. So one of the key things for us is what are people actually doing with this technology? And forgive me, I don't know, is Ian in the room, Ian Milliken? No, he's speaking this afternoon. I'm not going to give his entire presentation, but I've just taken a couple of highlights. He's worked with us, he's from IANSYST, one of the suppliers of a lot of assistive technology, and working with the University of Southampton ourselves, we've got some surveys of what people do with their phones. And these are people who've actually got access needs, and you can see it's not a huge sample, but it's interesting with 17 countries involved. And if you have learners or people that might like to be talking to us, come and talk to me afterwards. Is mobile phone or mobiles accessibility a myth? It would certainly appear so. If you look at that, you won't see all the detail, but there are a couple of bullet lines in that graph there that look at screen size and text size, but they're not saying that overwhelmingly they are a problem, because there are other things they can do with it. What might inclusion look like? The vast majority of people say they don't want to speak into it. That's the right-hand side. They don't want to instruct it to do things with speech. What they do want to do is they want to hear it. They want to have things reading to them, or they want to be able to have that facility where the menus perhaps read to them. So it's a really in-depth survey about what people are doing, and again, Ian will pick up on that later on. But I think this is another thing I want to do, particularly on a thanks basis. It's a bit like the Oscars, this one, really. I need to say thank you to the suppliers. The suppliers and industry have responded hugely. 2.5 years ago, we were saying, if we could just get a Daisy reader into the iPhone, what a difference that would make. Then everybody else started to come on board, and it's a reality. It's there. Things are happening. We would say now, I think, that actually industry, and the handheld industry particularly, is starting to look at a default platform for people for living. Never mind learning, we're talking about living. And that makes a huge difference. So if you have learning and development put together, maybe those are the two key words we need to start to think about instead of learning and teaching. Maybe it's learning and development we're now about. We've got, as you will well know, I'm sure by every advert and everything on the web, because you're that kind of audience and I don't have to teach grandmothers to suck eggs, the notion that some of these applications that are flying in through the window to all these phones and everything else, they would never come to market. But now they're there, they're able to be used. But how do you know and how do you keep up with those kind of things? I'm guessing it's your group of experts, but how do we then extend that to other people? Blue sky or reality? There's an awful lot of people in the room that I'm already talking to about RFID, radio frequency identification. It's going to be in every mobile phone next year. RNIB have been using it for years. Blind people have been using it years. You only have to go down streets where you've got scaffolding and everything else. There's a whole range of uses for it in all sorts of industry. But all I will say to people is that for people that know Alistair on my team, don't worry, the education element will be coming in because he's on the case. Alistair spent a week and a half in Vienna with the VI camp, which was an interesting experience, and he's come back with all sorts of links across Europe to actually look further about how we're going to look at that from an exploitation perspective for the educational elements. And we're already looking at motor vehicle engines with these chips inside to tell you which bit of the engine you're touching and all sorts, and we'll come on to that in a little bit while. The other thing is, this is where the world takes over. It changes specifically. The challenges that are being set now by, if you like, people wanting to live differently, wanting to use these things, mean that the likes of, I would never in my role have ever had the luxury of going and sitting and talking with the people at Google or Yahoo and saying, what can we do about this? What can we do about that? And then they go, oh, that's a real challenge. We'll have it fixed by Friday. And they do. You know, they literally will say, that's a real challenge. We need to do something. Yahoo put the first videos up that were automatically captioned because they worked with Reading University and talked to the people at DEFAX. And they went, oh, we hadn't thought of that. We'll do it. And so the technology's moving on. How do we then capture that kind of idea in order to be able to make your worlds easier and expose these kind of things? We're very fortunate to work with the Ricks Centre in the University of East London, who are looking at symbol card recognition, which if you've seen it in action, and I'm sorry we had a debate about whether to risk the video, but we're not going to. The notion that you can hold cards up and it can differentiate by multiple. It's a bit like, you know that game where you used to do the the card under the tumblers? It's a bit like that, but it will recognise the symbols by the card, and actually you can surf the web by using just images that you hold up in front of a camera. Phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal stuff. Now, all of this wouldn't have been possible 15 years ago. And all this specialist activity, it brings to mind that most of the things that go on in special education is absolutely specialist, and it's innovative beyond belief, but they don't think it is. It's just what they do. They just think, actually, this is just part of my role. This is what my learners do. This is how we survive. This is whatever. And it's very, very hard to get them to actually recognise that actually what they do might be of interest to somebody else. And you can guarantee if you go talk to some of these people, they go, oh, we haven't thought anybody else might be interested. We're just doing it because such and such a learner wants to be able to do X, and they've worked out a system. So how do we get that wealth of knowledge that already exists with that and your knowledge tied together to help the massive programs that we've got around the UK online centres, which Neil touched on and I know Helen's going to speak about a little later, the public libraries, all these places where when people walk in with their technology, if they need to use enabling technology or to use assistive technology, how do we equip the staff with those kind of skills to take that forward? How do you make a real difference? We've been working with an awful lot of people trying to think about how to actually engage staff with the very basic things around mobile and portable applications so that they can actually understand their role in it. It's not a specialist role anymore. This is absolutely key to everybody's use of technology. And of course the big question is it different teaching techniques? Or is it something different, you know, are you doing something different? How many people use Robo-Braille? Oh, how many people know about Robo-Braille? The same thought, that's very worrying. Can I just suggest that that's just won for the third time one of the main European awards, a phenomenally powerful resource. If you want to send a well-formed word processed document to a particular email address and it comes back as an MP3 player with approximately, I'm looking at Lisa or somebody, how many minutes? 5 minutes? Mags at the back. About 5 minutes, a perfectly formed MP3 file. Well, Lars, who invented it, said, well, that's fine, we've been doing MP3 files. What do we need to do about this Daisy thing you keep telling me about? So he's now done it for Daisy. You can now send an email, a document, to an email address. It sits there, and then you go, bingo, there comes a Daisy book back. Those are the kinds of free services that exist. There are many. I just happen to pick on this one because he's working very heavily in the inclusion area. But that is changing the way in which we can all operate with this world in order to be able to make those things accessible. But it's still about people and their roles. And I only have to look around the room to see many people that have got different roles with MoleNet, with different learning programs, with subject learning coaches. I love the fact we've got PDAs. I know we're at a Handheld conference, but they're not the digital assistants. They're actually professional development advisors. It's a nice thing. I love the fact I can say Dave Sugden's a PDA and I've got him in my pocket. It's great. However, showing people they're not just our resources, they happen to have our badge, and it doesn't matter. It's the community of practice that you've built up to give us that resource to be able to then get out free of charge everywhere. The ones of you that know us will know we've had significant numbers of downloads of these things, but it's about what people do with it in their role, and about what do the things in your organisation say you're doing and you can do. How many people actually work in some sort of a learning provider at this moment? School, college, university, wherever. How many people know what's in your single equality duty scheme about mobile learning? Oh, good. Gentleman about extra prize, absolutely. In fact, you could have the star prize, because I think you're the first person in the conference that's ever said yes. I used to ask it about e-learning, and they look very vague, but now if you ask about mobile learning, it's even harder. Go back and ask the question, what are you supposed to be doing? What are they supposed to be doing? What have they actually written into the policy? Major agenda item. It's a legal document stating what your provider is doing. What have you done about it? Local authorities, what advice and guidance are you giving to your providers around that area? So see Simon later, who's wandering around somewhere. I know he's one of my guys. What do people do? Now, this is where you need to get warm, so we'll be very quick now because I'm conscious of time. What do people do? How many people in the room actually create mobile learning resource or mobile resources or devices for and actually create content? Would you like to stand just to get a bit warm? You don't have to, but if you're feeling a bit cold, you could jump up and down. How many people think that this whole business is about different teaching techniques as opposed to creating content? What do they think that they use? Do they use different teaching techniques now? Are they advocating different teaching techniques? Ideas? Which? Let's have a vote. Creation of content. If you do that, how many people create content again? Just go for that. Okay. How many people who are using these kind of things with learners actually probably think about it about using different teaching techniques, either using communication or whatever? Okay. My only other guess is then the majority of you never meet learners. So that's worry. So I'll ask what else you're doing later. We'll find out about that one. But I think the question is, what are people doing with it? And the majority of people tell me that what they're doing is using it as communication, using it as different mechanisms for collaboration, for communication. They're not necessarily creating content. Again, how are we going to upskill the workforce to be able to do those kind of things? There's an example there of a learning object suitable for a mobile phone. And there's an example there of a QR code on a skeleton. So the last bit, because I know Donald wants me to hurry up, just a very quick thing about HE, further education, those kind of areas. Lots of exciting things going on that you need to be aware of, that you can take into your sector, or we can learn from you. There's things about the we, very other things. But that notion of equivalence, how are we going to assess? How are we going to look at the content and the teaching techniques of the kinds of things you do? What are the systems we're going to have in place to give equivalence? And there's some super projects coming out of some universities at the moment looking at exactly that, the criteria for assessment. And there's some students using, and I think, again, it was alluded to earlier on about the gaming idea, but looking at that for nurses returning to education. And the final bit is, do you consider e-books as handheld and mobile? I love the fact that Macquarie University released their figures. I haven't got this year's, I apologise. But if you can't read that element, they went from 800 or so books to over 60-something thousand in a year, changing from that. And Simon's done some work, some research with universities where staff actually prefer to mark on an e-book. So we might want to be thinking about those. And our final bit is we can't do any of this, whether it's Digital Britain or anything else, unless we're working with the people that make the decisions. And that's down to taking your advice, working with us to actually help influence some of those people. You're the community of practice, you're the cops. We've got to keep your message, your passion, your enthusiasm going, and we've got to make a difference because it makes a huge difference to the quality of life and learning. And just to round up on what Donald was asking earlier on, digital inclusion isn't political. It's actually about, it's a right, and it's actually, it makes people's lives. And a little young lady said, I can't speak, but I use my phone all the time because I want my mum to be able to see me. So, and with that, thank you for your patience, but most of all for your passion. Okay.